I guess most people don't realise that actually there are only a few cinemas that are truly independent in London. The Phoenix, I would say, is probably one of 4 or 5 still left in London, still operating. It's the oldest continuously running cinema in Britain. It's only closed once for its refurbishment and kept going throughout the war. In the mid-1980s it was going to be closed down. Local residents came together, they signed a petition to keep it open, since which it's been a registered charity and run by a local trust. We feel a pressure to show films bigger chains are showing because obviously we need to stay alive, but our remit is to show art cinema and films that are harder to find, harder to locate by local filmmakers. It is difficult because you get a lot of pressure from chains that have a lot more money, a lot more resources, a lot more clout when it comes to distribution. The industry has obviously realised that film as entertainment, film as a means of selling popcorn brings in a lot of money. So I think the kinds of films that distributors pick up and the kinds of films that exhibitors then show reflects that. If you look around at the kinds of cinemas that you would expect to be showing European subtitle films, art house films, world cinema, they're now also showing a lot of mainstream cinema, a lot of children's films, a lot of action films, mainstream Hollywood product, and I think you can see that they know that's where the money comes from, and so they're kind of hedging their bets a bit. They don't quite have the faith in cinema as art. The biggest factor is a kind of a cultural shift away from the kind of film that we value. I think that film is often treated as a kind of the entertainment escapist part of the culture that we consume. And I think people who enjoy things like Indiana Jones and Star Wars like to not feel guilty about enjoying those things, and don't necessarily want to go and see a Tarkovsky film because that feels like work. But going to see Indiana Jones is reliving your childhood, and that seems fun. And I do think that Hollywood has won that battle in many ways. That said, I think there are still plenty of people out there. We just need to cultivate those audiences and build cinemas that will show those films. A lot of our education work and community outreach work is all about making connections with local groups and getting them to kind of feel involved in the cinema, whether it's through programming or through events, to make them feel as though they have some kind of say and stake in the cinema itself.
The Close-Up Film Centre is a cinema, and we recently opened this cinema, which is a 40-seat cinema. And our program is mainly based on repertory cinema, where we show all the great directors and seasons on the films and film movements that shape the history of cinema. We also present lesser-known directors, as well as experimental cinema and artist films and videos. We one of the only independent cinema in London equipped with reel-to-reel 35mm projector, which means that we show also, whenever available, prints rather than digital copies. We also have a collection of 19,000 films on DVD. It's the biggest independent film collection in London. And we also started a couple of years ago a book library, which specializes also on film history and culture, and we've got about 1,500 books on this subject. Most cinemas now are run as businesses. The message is clear: cinema and film is a business, and it should be perceived as any other business rather than having a cultural element attached to it. I studied in Paris, and film culture was part of the fabric of our everyday life. We talked about it, we lived with it, there was an access also to this culture. There was a lot of rep cinemas, we had access to retrospectives constantly of the great directors, those beautiful masterpieces that are life-changing. It was accessible in terms of the ticket price, which has changed a lot in London. BFI now is charging a substantial amount of money, and it's going to be very difficult to convince someone to come and see a silent Russian film they never heard of for 15 or 18 pounds. And I think this is all those things that are important for us in terms of bringing an audience in, is to create also a context that we have post or pre-screening where people can meet, discuss, in the cafe and the bar that we have next door. The basics of a cinema, it's a black box, it's an immersive experience, there's no distraction. It invites the audience or the individual to concentrate and focus on the film that has been screened.
The Horse Hospital is primarily an event space that we started in 1993 for all those souls that didn't really have a home, as it were, and wanted to work outside the mainstream, whether it be with art, film, fashion. Well, the Horse Hospital is a very unusual building, even for London. It was originally built in 1797 for the stabling and servicing of hansom cab drivers' horses. You can still smell the horses, you know, even after 100 years or more. They've seeped into the fabric of the building. We've gone out of our way over the years to try and show stuff that you know, people wouldn't normally see in the cinema. And when we first started to do stuff, I was always a projectionist or something, so I'd be behind the screen, you know, pressing the buttons. And it used to give me so much joy just to look out from behind the screen and see those smiling faces, all like captivated by, you know, the image. You can't beat that intimacy. Generally we do a little talk or something about, you know, the films that we screen. It's all about being next to somebody else and sharing that experience, if you like, you know, whether it is, you know, a grainy old sort of video or an 8mm or a high definition. You know, it's all about sharing the experience, I believe. We encourage the artists that show here to program a night of film that has inspired their work in some way, and that opens up a whole other kind of network. We want to show stuff that's truly independent. It's like everything in filmmaking is controlled at the top end. You know, the distribution thing is yeah, you can only get what's available basically, and it's only those people who are sitting on those films or want, you know, you to see those particular films. I think all those kind of independent cinemas started with very good intentions. A lot of them have had to sell out, become backed by other chains, so they become the sort of the art end of Odeon cinemas or whatever. And yeah, we're being squeezed out by the bloody developers and all the rest of it, but it'll pop up somewhere else. It does develop, it does evolve, and everybody that comes here brings something else to the building, the spirit of punk, basically. And that is what drives this building. It's that you can do anything you want to do, if you really want to.
Nowhere is a space that fulfills two functions. It's a production space, it's a resource for artists who want to work with photochemical film in the digital age. And it's a social space, it's a space for screening, it's a space to view work, it's a space to talk about work. So it's ranges from performance to politics to poetry to music to improvisation to single screen to expanded, very, very broad. Tower Hamlets, where we're situated, is described as being the richest borough by day and the poorest by night. Concrete Heartland was screened on the day that we took part in the Stop the Blocks march around Tower Hamlets to visit estates and other spaces that were threatened with development, with closure, with this sort of move from public to private, of which Nowhere is one. Given the way that sort of commercial chain cinemas are now being run, and it is like basically a handful of middle-aged white men in Hollywood who now decide globally what gets screened and where. You know, I think there is more space for the sort of smaller micro cinema. You know, there are more and more sort of 30, 40, 50 seater cinemas popping up all over the place that are filled to capacity, but wouldn't be able to fill the big sort of chain screen venues. So I think given the pressures on space and resources for artists to show work, particularly in London, I think spaces like this are becoming even more important. There's the activist and there's the artist, and I think the activists sometimes have a scepticism and mistrust of artists. And there's a term that I've heard recently about the way that the arts has been used in the regeneration, the regeneration projects, art wash, that the artists are brought in, they're given free studios, They, you know, it's part of the regeneration of the area, but it's basically a way for the developers to then slide in to demonstrate, you know, oh, this is a nice space, you know, here we can charge lots of money for this nice space. I think it's interesting to find how through practice you can address the issues that the activists are addressing on the streets directly through the resources here, through, you know, through the misuse of the equipment, you know, and that's what I'm most excited about, is how the lab can be politically misused as well as materially misused. You can't make work in the community without the community coming into the space. So what's interesting about having the project space next door is that's used for language classes, it's used for meetings, you know, union meetings happen there as well. So the idea of the social coming into, you know, the artist project, the social project and the artist project coming together, that's a very important part of what Nowhere is and what we do. So to have a space where you can screen a work, where you can view a work and talk about it afterwards with the filmmaker or amongst, you know, yourselves, is a very simple thing, but it's vitally important, I think, you know, and it's the hardest thing to hold on to in a city where, you know, this public space, this sort of space for cultural discussion and dissemination of work is being lost, you know, on a daily basis.
Strangely, yes, I am optimistic. Yeah, people that just like have had enough of like being dictated to by the government and, you know, cinemas and so on, and want to do their own thing.
I think the rise in community screens is really encouraging. I think it really shows you that there are people who want to come together to watch certain types of films, to watch things that aren't available elsewhere, and to provide access to other people. I just think we have to be really creative about the ways we do these things, because there is no longer a funding body to go to who will just give you all of the money to do that.
Everything is kind of accessible now, and you can buy yourself a little cheap camera and make a film, and it's great that one can do that. It will carry on. I mean, it has to carry on.
We need to cultivate the idea that film can be art, and that film isn't just there to kind of watch while you eat your popcorn.
The cinema is, as Gilles Deleuze said, if there is hope in humanity, it will be through cinema. I think that cinema encompasses, it's about us, it covers everything. It's our history, it's through documentaries, through the documentation of human behavior, social interactions, everything. It's an art form, it's everything, there's everything in cinema.